layman's terms with Guy Nohra. Our guest today is Dr. David Grantham. David has an amazing background. First of all, you served in the military, so thank you for your service. PhD, I'm gonna love to hear the story about Latin America and the Middle East and how we can make a nice connection over there. And of course, he's the CEO of the Threat Group, which is also something that is very relevant right here, right now, as we speak. So Dr. Grantham, I'd like to start by asking you to tell us about yourself, how you got to where you ended up today. I always love the journey. Journey is a big deal for us and our audience. And then I'll probably every once in a while ask you a question here and there or interject. But it's really about, and at the end, we want to talk about the threats that we might be facing today, in a month, and 6 months, and just to kind of get a feel, so that our audience, they're very smart, but they don't have a lot of time to dig deep like someone like you does. And the idea is that we want them to, in today's, obviously, for me, in today's case, we want them to use as much common sense as possible in these crazy times to protect themselves and their families. So that's my introduction, but please go ahead and tell me about you and your journey and how things are going. And by the way, also book author. I don't want to forget. We want to talk about the book a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me.
Sure.
Yeah, my journey is kind of a like many, I guess, a twisted journey with a lot of detours or just changes because life does that, and you be flexible. But yeah, I was actually born and raised in Florida, and I'm in a mixed family, a family of Latin Americans and a family of original Americans or Native Americans. So it's
Okay.
I had an interesting upbringing in that regard, and I had the privilege of serving in the military, in the Air Force, with a group called Office of Special Investigations, and that's the premise of my book, is introducing audiences first to this outfit that few know about, and then also explaining their role as counterintelligence officers in the United States Air Force and in the intelligence community more broadly.
So if you can tell us now very quickly exactly what it means. Who are they? What do they do? And of course, nothing that's gonna
Sure.
social national security. Just for us to know.
Absolutely. Well,
Okay.
the Air Force of Office of Special Investigation, called OSI, is the primary investigative agency, criminal and counterintelligence investigative agency for the Air Force. I like to say it's similar to NCIS. We just don't have our own TV show. There's some differences between the two, but they're largely the same. And in OSI, you generally have a criminal wing that does criminal investigations, felony level. We're like the FBI for the Air Force, same authorities within the Air Force. And then on the other side is the counterintelligence. With counterintelligence, I really like to spell out as just simply the spies watching the spies. We are the goalies protecting our information. So we're trained on how to identify compromises, how to identify spies, how to run double agents, which is someone comes to you spying, you flip them and you send them back to spy on your behalf. So we're trained on guarding more or less the assets and the technology and the people of the United States. And that's the side I served primarily on, was the counterintelligence side. And when we deploy as counterintelligence officers. And so when I wrote my book, the objective there was in order to introduce OSI, but also explain the role of counterintelligence in a nonfiction narrative approach, which is I'm telling a story. It's true,
Yeah.
but I'm telling it as if you're reading in a fiction way, because I wanted readers to enjoy the journey that I was on as a counterintelligence officer in Iraq.
And do you work with other counterintelligence, other agencies, and the other services? Is that so? Are you all in the same place, or are you all sharing the same? So it's a team effort.
Yeah, we work within the intelligence community, which is broadly defined those typical three-letter agencies, CIA, DIA, FBI. And because intelligence has expanded so much since 9/11, there are very few criminal investigative agencies that do not have some sort of intelligence capability.
Got it.
So we work with all these different federal agencies primarily because we're a federal agency. We're what's called an 1811, which is a special agent. And we work within that community, but OSI are primarily based in military installations across the world. We're there to primarily support military. That's not always true, but by and large, that's the case.
Okay, perfect. So I'm sorry I interrupted you. So you were doing that, and that's when you wrote the book. Where, by the way, I'm going to buy it as soon as we hang up here. So I'm
Well,
looking
you just let
forward.
me know, and I'll send you a signed copy.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay,
um,
okay,
yeah, the after leaving the military, the post 9/11 GI Bill, which the American taxpayer has so generously agreed to and funded for our veterans, allowed me to go back to school to get an advanced degree, a PhD, and my primary focus was, as you said at the beginning, the relationship between Latin America and the Middle East. Why? Many people say, why would you study that? That's so well. For one, I have a familial connection to Latin America, primarily to Cuba and the Dominican Republic. So I have a personal interest in studying the history of Latin America. I also wanted to understand US policy during the Cold War because my PhD is in history. And I had obviously with the military, a background in being in the Middle East. And that was all exploratory until I landed on, which I know we're going to talk about soon, was the attacks in the early 90s in Buenos Aires in Argentina.
sure.
And it really got me thinking, why? Why did Hezbollah, which I think at this point everyone's fairly certain that was the culprit,
Yeah,
why would they attack Buenos Aires, the Israeli embassy, and the Jewish center there in the capital? And that's what got me thinking, let me see if I can offer a historical perspective on why that happened, but let's trace it all the way back to the beginnings of the Cold War, the end of World War II, and see if we can't better explain how that occurred. And that's really for your audience. That's really where that inspiration comes from, and that's quite common in the PhD because they tell you study something nobody else is studying because that's going
yeah,
to make a name for yourself. What
yeah.
they don't tell you is when you do that, nobody knows what to do with you because you're studying something nobody else has done. So it could be a blessing and a curse at the same time.
I could tell you if I was a decision maker with what you just told me and what I know about in general the drug trade, Hezbollah's involved in the drug trade all over Latin America, using that to finance their nefarious activities all over the world and so on. I would be come into my office and we're working together because we're going to stop this. So
it,
thank you. That's a crucial. I mean, I think we found out, and you probably are one of the people who did find out the Venezuela connection and Hezbollah, some
yes,
Bolivia connections, and of course the unfortunate attacks in Buenos Aires.
absolutely. There's enough information there to fill a library, and few fully appreciate because a lot of it is very underhand. It's subterfuge. It's not plainly delivered, and it takes a little bit of study to understand the players and understand the motivations. But as an intelligence officer, I'm used to working in the gray, so those relationships and connections and hiding of finances and movement of weapons and people, those sorts of things were common to me. But it does tend to I say quote unquote scare off people when they're trying to study it because it can become kind of complicated. But you're right. It's the simple answer is Hezbollah is involved in Latin America far deeper and far wider than we want to admit, and they're involved in criminal operations, which funds their attacks in the Middle East and elsewhere across the world. I like to say the Western Hemisphere, to include the United States to a certain degree, serves as the funding area for Hezbollah, for Hamas, and for others like them. While Al Qaeda and ISIS want to attack us, those proxies of Iran would choose to fundraise off of us. So
Yeah.
there's subtle different, maybe not subtle, but there's differences there that are crucial understanding.
Absolutely, definitely. So then you got your PhD, the first job, and then what after that you came into the, I guess not even the private sector. You were still working with with.
Yeah, well, I worked in policy for a little bit on national security policy through a think tank, and after that was recruited to serve as a chief, as a director of intelligence at a major sheriff's department. They had a new sheriff, and they're looking for someone to develop an intelligence department for them. And I happened to be on the list, and someone called me and said, "Would you be interested in getting back into public service?" And they said, we know it's not the Air Force, it's not national intrigue or international intrigue of what you were doing, but we really, really think we would benefit from you helping us build this out. And so I agreed to do that, and I ended up serving there and left not too long ago as a chief over intelligence and technology. So I was able to. Most people go from the local to the federal level in terms of career progression in law enforcement, and I sort of did the opposite.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was an eye-opening experience, and if I may, the detention centers and the jails serve as the most underutilized intelligence source of intelligence than anything I've ever experienced. I mean, the information that I received willingly from cooperating inmates who just wanted to talk
Wow.
was I couldn't fathom getting that level of information when I was on the federal level. So
Oh,
I took great pride in turning over information I was receiving from local sources to the federal government, and the federal government calling me and saying, "Where in the world are you getting this?" I said, "Well,
that's
let me tell you." So
well, it's gratifying for me as a citizen to know that our sheriff departments are relying on someone like you, because we know we're going to get to this later, but the intelligence piece of law enforcement is becoming more and more important every day in our country, especially after the last 4 years. But we'll get back to that. So, sheriff, and so tell me about being a CEO, because I'm a venture capitalist. Anything you
sure.
want to know, I can be on your board. I could tell you all the things you need to, all the things to watch out for in order to create this incredibly successful company.
Absolutely. Well, what began as me exploring how to monetize what I had created in terms of a skill and a service. I really felt a passion for supporting people and supporting organizations. And what I found was many organizations, small, would come to me going, we don't understand terrorism. Well, can you help us understand, is our building protected? Or we don't understand active shooter. Can you tell us how we should prepare? And what I found was there was, much like I'm sure in a VC world, venture capitalist world, where people come with all kinds of finance questions, have no idea how to finance and capitalize certain strategies that we want to employ. I found on the security side, there's many people that said, we recognize the threat, we appreciate the threat, we don't know what to do. And it's so scary and so complicated. We're not sure. I mean, if we just go to a private company and say we want cameras, they're going to
Yeah,
sell us the most high-end cameras. We don't know if we're doing the right thing or the wrong thing,
sure.
investing in the right process. And so as I was having those conversations and meeting with community members, I decided I think I could try this as a business. And in that process, I have some very close friends who decided we want to invest in this. And so instead, we went and bought a small business, threat management group, and I now running this business, which is primarily supporting the Department of Defense in what I like to call high threat training. We specialize. We try to offer those people who have been there, done that, take them and provide them back to the military so that the military gets the best training possible at a very affordable price. Because I want the taxpayer ultimately to recognize I want to get the best people, giving them the best knowledge for the best price. And if I can
Yeah.
do all that, because I've been on that side, I know how crucial training is, and you want the best people. And I also appreciate the taxpayer saying, this fraud, waste, and abuse is out of hand. And so
Yeah.
I'm hoping in my small little corner of that world that I can serve all those purposes.
So you passed test number one of an entrepreneur, which is you saw the need, you found a market niche, and you decided to start a company in that area. So that's the first thing that's really, really important. And you're right, it's a huge opportunity because it's what it's all about these days. And when I was thinking about this interview, I was like, how are we going to do this without, of course, exposing anything, and that's a national security problem. But so anything I'll do, it'll be case study
Sure.
if we get there. But my question to you is, do you have a business development office that goes out and speaks with police forces, law enforcement, or military, or do they come to you? So how do you do your business development piece?
It's a little bit of both. What I'm finding, it's the world is fairly small in the security space in terms of people and high end training and product development. So with our training, we also want to supply you with the latest training tools. So, for example, if someone is using a certain type of bomb, go back to the Boston Marathon bombings in the crock pot. Um, that needs to be a training tool. So we would try to redevelop what it is. Right now, we're trying to redevelop drones that have been used in attacks across the Middle East and supply them as training tools. You need to know how to exploit these. You need to know how to recognize them. But to go to your question, it's a little bit of both because one of the challenges, as anything else working with the federal government, is there is a lot of red tape, even for a vendor attempting to um, do the right thing. Let me be
Yeah.
clear there. There are some vendors, I'm sure, that are not.
Oh,
And
sure.
when you're trying to do the right thing, there's a lot of rules to follow. And therefore, it can narrow your scope of business development. So you can know pretty quickly what you're eligible for, what you should pursue, what you should team up with another group to pursue. So the
Okay.
business development side of that becomes fairly streamlined in the sense that it's narrow and you get in on it. But I also do attempt to go out and talk to local law enforcement and state officials because the federal government, you know where to go. There's major you pick a department of the Department of Defense, pick a branch, find out what capabilities they need, and if you can service that need. On a local level, just in Texas alone, there's 254 counties. So that means there's 254 sheriff's departments.
Yeah.
Each one has its own jurisdiction, its own needs, its own topography, all its own number of. So sometimes that's where the business development, hitting the ground and beating a path to these different organizations becomes crucial because you need to identify what their needs are or identify what you can assume every sheriff's department needs
Shouldn't. Yeah.
and then see if you can modify that to their specific situation.
Sure. And one thing also you mentioned also is that you're a veteran business. So you're all everybody in your company is a veteran as well?
Well, most of my employees are
Yeah.
veterans, and that's not a requirement. That's just merely the fact that the kind of people that we need are likely going to be veterans because we want to train active duty and help active duty finish their mission, accomplish their mission. So it ends up being a lot of veterans. But the company designations, there's several of them that you can get with the federal government, are strictly applied to the owners or owner. So,
Okay.
but there are certain badges that you can acquire that are more of a nice to have, saying
Yeah.
we hire veterans. Most of our employee base is veterans, et cetera, et cetera.
Again, as a venture capitalist, I was on the sciences side, but anytime I could hire someone who had come from the military, I just knew they were going to be on time,
Yeah.
they're going to be reliable, they're going to be motivated, they're going to listen to what we're saying. So I think there are so many qualities that come when someone has served. So that was a very important trait for me when I was looking for people. So that's why I asked the question. I think it's very, and of course, someone who served our nation, deserves to be on the top of the list when it comes to, when they make that transition. God knows it's never easy anyway. Any
Yeah.
transition is hard, much less from combat or just military in general. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that. It was one of the things that we definitely paid attention. So I my so the last 2 weeks,
Mhm.
people have been watching what's happening. The Israel and Iran had a war. We didn't know what the U.S. was going to do. There was a lot of speculation. What's the president thinking? And then people show you airplanes flying and over the Atlantic and so on. And as all of this is taking place, and you and I know how much hyperbole in general that region of the world likes to use, right? So every time
Yes.
they would say, "We are going to, but you'll never believe what's going to happen to you after this attack." I know enough that I ignore most of this, but I have to tell you, every single day, I kept thinking, I hope to God there are no sleeper cells in this country that they're going to activate,
Mhm.
because that's a tool and their backs were against the wall. So, two things. A, what do you think about my theory? And B, what should we be doing as a population at large just to kind of watch for these kind of things and make sure that we can protect ourselves and our families?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to the first part of that question, I wholeheartedly agree that the Middle East, there is a different, well, there's a cultural difference, obviously, and one of the elements that I've learned over time, both in the Hebrew and the Arab worlds, is there's a different level of enthusiasm. There's an expression that's required of you to seem authentic. In the United States, we're taught to be stoic. We're taught to actually
Yeah,
don't do that.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
in some ways told the opposite. In the Middle East, it's there is a sense that you need to express yourself almost to a point that an American might blush, because it lends to your credibility.
yeah,
And
yeah,
those are sorts of things right there that sometimes we don't make distinctions on. And so when I see the talk and the hyperbole, as you say, I really go back to, okay, and I was telling someone recently, I said, my concern at this point, and it's kind of lessened a little bit now with the quote unquote ceasefire, but after maybe 6 days, 5 days after this had kicked off, I said, my concern is either the Ayatollahs and the leadership in Iran either believes their eschatology or they don't. And what I mean by that is they claim death to Israel. They claim in their religious fanaticism that they have to usher in uh, a war with Israel for their 12th Imam or their religious leader to return. um, there is a spiritual eschatology that is tied to their strategy. And either my thought was either they believe it and now's the time, or they don't. Maybe they postpone it. Maybe now's not the time. Um, but that was my concern, and it still is my primary concern. Um, because if they do believe it, it's just a matter of time. Now they have a destruction of Israel clock in Palestine Square in Tehran,
yeah,
and that clock is set to 2040. That's what the Ayatollah has said the destruction of Israel will be, is 2040.
Yeah.
So we're not out of the woods by any stretch. And
Yeah.
I think Israel is probably, I think the goal, while it was destruction of those nuclear facilities, I think there's also a secondary regime change desire,
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah.
And
David, if you can extrapolate for us a little bit, you and I know the 12th Imam, but someone who's out there in our audience, maybe they've heard it once or twice, but it's crucial because, as you say, their timeline is very different when they're looking at something like this. So please just take us through this very quickly. And with your PhD in Middle East studies, you're going to know that.
yeah, well, I'll try to do it very quickly without, because there comes a point when even religious scholars argue about exactly how something is. But for the sake of the audience, the way I like to think of it, in terms of application and what do I do with this information? The Muslim world is, generally speaking, separated between Sunnis and Shias. 80% of the world is Sunni. 20%, 10 to 15 to 20% is Shia. Iran is the only Shia nation, like a politically dominant Shia nation in the country. Iraq has a large Shia influence, but and the Shias differentiate themselves um, in their eschatology in terms of their end times belief. And one of their primary drivers is what we call the 12th Imam, and there was a succession of imams after Muhammad died, and the final one, according to the Shia, quote unquote, disappeared, for lack of a better term, and will reappear once war has begun, and will usher in the final era for the Shia.
Thank you. Very well said. Perfect. I think everyone will understand this. Just for color, I'll add that there is when the Shia, there's a little bit martyrdom for Shias, and suffering is part of the ethos of who they are, and it's just something that we need to understand as Americans, which is that suffering is, they do the Ashura vacation where
Yes.
they hit themselves with and they're bleeding everywhere and so on. So martyrdom and suffering, like Ali did, way back. It's all part of that, and I think we need to understand that as a country, because we think we're bombing and we're winning and so on. But if you're a very religious imam over there or mullah, this is just, that's what we do. We suffer. So
Yes,
anyway,
that's a very very good distinction. Yes.
So you were saying, so now you were worried about, are they playing the long game, and so.
Yeah, and that's still my primary concern, really, because if they're not serious and they're just being publicly antagonistic and religious zealotry as part of their public language, then that'll come out soon enough, and we'll be able to see that. So that's where my primary concern is. So when you start talking about what you just mentioned with sleeper cells, it's kind of tied to that in a way, because if they believe their eschatology, theoretically they would deploy those regardless of the consequence. And I, at this point, we're concerned with that, certainly in the law enforcement community and the intelligence community, and we've been concerned with that for a long time. However, and I'll go back to my earlier point, the Western Hemisphere tends to be a fundraising location for Iran and for Hezbollah. So while the sleeper cells is a very real threat, it's a different dynamic for those who are operating here. Now, when we go look at the instances in which Iran has tried to, we have past instances where they tried to assassinate the Saudi Arabian ambassador in Washington, D.C. through a drug cartel. We have other instances where they attempted to assassinate, or at least plan the assassination of Ambassador John Bolton. And those failed miserably. And when you look at their strategy inside the Western Hemisphere, well, maybe in the United States in particular, but it's not very strong. ISIS had better success in terms of terrorist attacks inside the United States than Iran did, and there may be some variations to that, such as Iran wasn't interested and ISIS was. Nevertheless, it to activate fundraisers to carry out attacks, you're asking some people to do something different than they've been doing for the past. So
I see.
I think the sleeper cell is a concern, yes, but because of how they've invested in the United States with their assets, I tend to think that that can happen, but it's less likely because they understand if they want to keep getting money illegally through criminal activity, it's best not to do something like that, because you will. Would you have 5 dead bodies, or do you want to still funnel $10 million out of the United States? Your pick.
So you don't want to blow up the ATM.
You don't. That's it. There you go.
That's what we are, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of my theory. And then now, when you say how do we protect ourselves and what can the public do, one of the things that we studied in terrorism in general is there's approximately 6 or 7 steps that are carried out during a terrorist attack. And this is also true for an active shooter to a certain degree. There are specific steps that are taken. I try to identify those steps that are most visible to the public and most visible to law enforcement. One of those is what we call a dry run. Typically, terrorists will practice their attack.
So folks, I want folks to really listen to this, because that's crucial. If anybody's going to write notes, this is the time. So dry run.
Dry run. So this is seeing something suspicious that looks out of place and failing to report it because nothing happened. This can be a parked car with someone taking photos, someone videotaping a sensitive infrastructure. These are, imagine an actual attack happening, or an actual attack, but the attack itself not occurring, someone walking through the steps.
Okay.
That's important. And I know some people go, how would I recognize a dry run? You would be shocked at how your instinct kicks in when you see something that seems out of place, odd behavior, and otherwise. We have story after story of somebody coming in later going, I saw that guy walking around acting weird, and I just was afraid to say anything. I just thought I would be the one to sound crazy. So when I follow up with a dry run, I tell people, do not hesitate. Maybe I shouldn't use a negative. Call law enforcement immediately. Let law enforcement, let the FBI, they have whole units called JTTFs, Joint Terrorism Task Force. Their whole job is to take fragmented information and go look into it. Citizens, it is not your responsibility. You should not feel the burden of trying to explain away something. If it seems out of place, you know your environment better than anybody. Report it. Let them decide if it's worth exploring. We've stopped many attacks because someone observed something and we were able to thwart it. So that's...
Okay, so dry run.
Dry run. The second, maybe less frequently used, but still vital for especially business folks, the acquisition of material to carry out an attack.
Sure.
Timothy McVeigh, he used in the Oklahoma City bombings, he used fertilizer, a specific kind of fertilizer. Ever since then, the FBI made a very easy decision, and other law enforcement said, if somebody tries to buy this specific fertilizer, you need to call us. If it looks like it is not appropriate for whatever the purchaser, ask these follow-up questions. Are you using it on a farm? Why do you need 60 bags? Why can't you use one? Et cetera, et cetera. Attacks have been thwarted since then because someone who controls and operates fertilizer and resells it has said, that's odd. Why are 6 bags of this going to an apartment? And they called and they stopped an attack. So
Okay.
the acquisition of material, and this can be at Walmart, this can be a gun store, this can be a lot of places that if it's suspicious to you, report it.
Okay. Okay. So dry runs, acquisition of materials.
Those are the two primary steps that
Okay. Okay.
we look for or that are publicly accessible. Now, where it deviates a bit is with an active shooter. We like to say that the active shooter will leak their intentions prior to an attack. Almost, not always, but often. And the red flag that I always bring up to people is, and we're getting a little off from the Middle East, but I thought it was crucial to point out,
Sure.
active shooters tend to praise past active shooters. If you ever see that, report that to law enforcement. That is, if there is I know a lot of people feel like, how will I ever know if a person's about to shoot up a school or a church? Or generally, they will have praised past active shooters.
Very interesting. And of course, very important for parents, for siblings, for friends. If someone is praising an active shooter and they're already a little off, that's a red flag right there.
Red flag,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes. That's okay. That's very, very important. Nice. So when it comes to us now, as a country, what keeps you up at night?
Well, coffee usually, but uh,
Red Bull? No.
yeah. um, what really is, I think at this point gives me some pause is the what I see as an ideological fracturing within the United States. There seems to be, I think it's actually improved in some ways, but the improvement has exposed that there's segments of our society that you can be disenfranchised with the United States government. You can be frustrated. I teach history right now, and struggle within the U.S. government. Vehement disagreements, are not new. The very first administration had such disagreements that Thomas Jefferson stepped down. So this is not new. What is becoming more of a challenge, I see, is such differing expectations about the role of government in the United States, the identity of what a United States citizen strives for. There's a concern, and why do I bring that up? Because that is where adversaries will exploit the United States. It's not bombs and bullets, although it can be that. It is exploiting what has always been healthy disagreements within democracy. Other countries will exploit that because they can't go toe to toe, and we've seen this in social
Sure.
media and otherwise.
Sure.
Venezuela has become an expert in capitalizing on the disagreements to make it violent. I mean, they work tirelessly to exploit our differences, and so I don't have. I mean, we can go through solutions and all that
Sure. Sure.
later, but that's probably one of the things that concerns me, because I'm also someone who's an advocate for free speech and not using the, how do you say, the cloak of disinformation to silence critics.
Sure.
And so it's a very, in the intelligence world, the national security world, if you're an honest person, you would admit it's a very difficult balance to say, I'm all for free speech, and I don't like the use of disinformation to silence critics. I also understand what the Chinese are up to, what the Venezuelans are up to. How do you square that circle? And that's always been a challenge, or at least in these last decade, I would say.
But it's fascinating you brought this up, and I wasn't going to say anything before about this, but I was born in Lebanon. I was in the Christian militias at 15, fighting against the PLO,
Mm,
and I saw overnight what a civil war is like. And my biggest fear for America right now is the polarization.
yeah.
And I'm sometimes when I see certain things, it's almost the trauma comes back, the way people
Mm,
are talking to each other, especially on social media, the things that happen, the violence that happens here and there, the making the other side. So I'm actually writing a book about just that
mm.
in order to stop it, because not on my watch is this going to happen. But if you hadn't brought it up, I wouldn't bring it up at all. But it's amazing that it's also something you're concerned about. And I know, of course, you know better than me. Lebanon was the place where everybody interfered.
Yes.
The way the Venezuelans interfere, the way the Chinese interfere here.
Yes.
But we're almost becoming that. The Iranians interfere with us now. We have our internal. I did an interview with a gentleman about recently who wrote the book, The Man Behind the Curtain, George Soros. So you,
Hmm.
you have internal enemies that are actually trying to weaken us and get us on to fight each other. And it's something, again, you brought it up, and we'll work together on this. We're just not going to let it happen. You
Yeah.
know,
It's
you
it's a, and I try to make my way across the aisle, quote unquote, culturally, politically, not to sacrifice my principles. And that's I think some people's concern is if I even acknowledge or attempt to engage, I have to compromise something that's critical to me. And I don't believe that's the case. But sometimes just the act of working together to understand. And I'll tell you this: I had a hard time growing up with identity. My mom was
Okay.
from Latin America, was from the Dominican Republic. My dad was an American, so I had this bipolar upbringing. My grandfather didn't speak English, so I didn't speak Spanish, and we had this. But I was in an environment where everybody fit. I loved sports. I loved basketball. I was one of the few white kids on the basketball court in my church neighborhood, which was a very poor neighborhood. And I just did not fit. I felt like I'd been a lot of places, but I didn't belong any one place. And because of that, I've taken real sensitivity to appreciating other people's perspective, not to the extent that I'm going to compromise my principles,
Of
but I
course.
will listen to concerns because I don't think I have it all figured out. And I've been amazed at when I talk to somebody that I think I'm never going to agree with this person. It's amazing the conversation you can have to go, we're not that far apart. We just
Yep.
have maligned each other in our heads. We still disagree on the fundamental use of government, for instance,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we are engaging in a conversation that somebody can't exploit because now you know me. So I know that's difficult for everyone. They want to boil the ocean when it comes to cultural divide, but sometimes it's a matter of just in your local community. Start local, think
Yeah.
global, and I
Neighbors.
think that's one small step you can make in this what you and I do see as a growing divide.
I use the bell curve analogy always. And so you got the extreme left, middle right, extreme right. And my thinking is you have to block the two extremes and do as much in the middle as you can, because that's between 60 and 80%
Mm-hmm.
if we're lucky. And that's you talking to people that disagree with you. And it's exactly what we need to be doing. And that's why I spend most of my focus on is like that middle of the bell curve. And hopefully that's how we'll be able to stop these. But I tell you, I saw it live. I see how the extremes are so good. It's so easy to be on the extreme. It's
Yeah.
so easy to take these strong opinions and say, generalize. I saw it. I saw, and sometimes, I see it in board meetings. One
Mm-hmm.
person, we don't want to sell the company. Why not? We don't want to sell the company. Well, explain to us why not. We just have a pretty good offer. Anyway, so it's very easy to take the extreme view. It's impossible to do what you're proposing, which is let's sit down and talk about this and let's walk away with respect for each other. So So I'm so glad you're doing this, and I appreciate it, especially in your line of work. So please promote the book now, and so I buy it and I send it to you to sign it, or how do I do that? But I want to make sure I buy it.
Well, we can talk about that off air. I'll get you a
Okay.
copy. We'll figure that all out. Don't worry
Okay.
about that. But the
Okay.
book is called Consequences in Intelligence Officers' War. Not the sexiest title, but I wanted to communicate the word consequences, and not because that was the original title, but it came out in the wash, if you will, because it began as my work as an intelligence officer, and I was at Camp Bucca in southern Iraq, and that is where ISIS was formed. And we didn't know it back then. And I happened to be sitting in my living room with my young son, and the news came on, and they started mentioning Camp Bucca. And this was back when ISIS was running across Iraq and Syria. And I thought, what does Camp Bucca have to do with this? They began explaining the relationship and all the work we had done there. I went, that's it. We were following these terrorists. We knew they were radicalizing others in the jail, in the prison. We knew that. We didn't anticipate it would be ISIS. And so I shared that story one day flippantly to an editor who was coming through our PhD program. And he said, you should write a book. And I said, oh, I have nothing interesting to say. And he said, well, you just told me some very interesting stories.
Yeah.
And from there, the book blossomed, or that story blossomed into a book where I introduced readers to the Office of Special Investigations. I walked them through my deployment to Afghanistan, going up against the Taliban, and then moving to Camp Bucca, and the work against Iran. One of the questions I've posed recently on social media was, we're talking about, was this an authorized strike constitutionally that President Trump the military carried out under President Trump? And one of my questions, maybe it's theoretical, but I thought it worth asking, was, we were fighting Iran when I was in Iraq, military to military. Now, it wasn't, no one wanted to talk about it, but it was happening. Did that war ever end? Have we been fighting Iran since then? Because to me, that's materially important to answering some of these questions today. And I talk about that in the book. So I tell people, if you want to get a glimpse firsthand at what we were going up against in southern Iraq, it was the open secret is our battle against Iran. And finally, the head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Zarqawi, was killed while I was there. And in the intelligence world, it's a very small world. And so as I'm writing my book, I found myself going through all these major events that happened and realizing how close I was, the informants that I had, the Iraqis who bravely would come talk to me, providing me information. And this is where it goes back to sitting down with people who disagree with you. I had to do that for a career. I did that in the jail.
Sure.
I would sit down with people who had wildly different opinions about things. And yet, the best compliment I ever received was, David, you're my only friend. I thought,
whoa,
this is not that relationship, but it's gotten to the point where they feel that way. And so the book is really explaining that's it. But I do so as if you're reading a Tom Clancy novel. It's all narrative nonfiction. It's firsthand accounts, because the best thing I was ever told about writing a book, show, don't tell. Show me what you did. Don't just tell me. And that changed the way I wrote. And it was a great book. It's won a few awards. I'm really excited about it.
That's great.
And I'm glad I've had the opportunity to talk about it.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it, to reading it. I'll take it with me on airplanes so people can ask, and I can say, I can do a pitch there for you.
That would be fantastic.
And if you ever come to Nevada, I'd love to get together for coffee or a beer, and vice versa if I go to South Carolina.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you having me. Thank you, Guy.
Oh, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for everything that you do. Appreciate it from the heart. God bless.
God bless. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.